Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Bismillah. So the discussion for the day will be regarding Maqasid al Sharia and modernity. So the approach that I have for the discussion today, we'll first talk about the Sharia as a immutable source of divine law, and what we mean by that is the fact that you cannot strip away the foundations of this law. So what Allah has legislated for humanity in regards to the actions that He expects from us, as well as the character and the moral foundations that guide our decision making in life, they cannot be changed. When it comes to, but also the claim that I make is that the divine law is immutable from its sources, not necessarily its application. And as time progresses through society and civilization, the need for this understanding, in my opinion, in my belief, is necessary for us to be able to engage with modernity. So my goal is to help break down the understanding of the Sharia, or the divine law, as well as the application of divine law, being the Fiqh, or the Fiqh in regards to Ibadat, worship, as well as Mu'amalat, which is the interpersonal, more social, and even sometimes political aspect of the law. And then help to kind of break down some of the critiques of modernity from, for example, the severance of man from revelation, in the overemphasis of reason upon the life of human civilization, and then some of the approaches and some of the steps that can be taken practically regarding different fields in civilization, be it in economics or in family relations, as well as social communities and things of that nature. So so to start, what I first want to lay out is my claim, right? My claim is that divine law, Sharia, is immutable from its sources, rather than the application, right? So what I mean by that is, let me go to the next slide. Okay, so what I mean by that is, first of all, the Sharia in of itself. So the Sharia, derived from the Arabic term, its linguistic meaning is the path to be followed. And Allah tells us in the Qur'an that He's given us a divine law and an open road. And this encompasses, in my estimation, the immutable sources of the divine law, primarily being the Qur'an and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, as a framework in which we're able to guide our principles and our conduct. But on top of that, there are also in regards to the sources of the Sharia, there are clear-cut, in Arabic the term is qat'i, verses in the Quran. For example, the prohibition of alcohol, or the prohibition of pork. These coupled with these verses, coupled with the immutability of the Sharia, gives us the path to take in regards to our legal conduct, our social conduct, and personal conduct. We can move on. So yeah, again, here it says that the term for Sharia means the path to be followed, namely the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And over the years of legal understanding of the Sharia in Islamic civilization, legal scholars and jurists exercise their understanding of the Arabic language, as well as their understanding of the contextual revelation, to derive rulings from the Sharia, from the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And that domain is regarded as fiqh, right, which literally in its literal meaning means understanding. But over time, as Islamic civilization progressed, there was kind of I guess you could say there's in a way kind of a relegation of fiqh as the immutable source, as that immutable source of divine law. And this is where the stagnation begins to take root in regards to legal dynamism, quote unquote, of the Sharia. So much so to the point that Muhammad Iqbal, the South Asian philosopher, he says that the closing of this door of ijtihad reduced the law to a state of immobility and archaism, meaning that that original divine nature of the Islamic law slowly began to progress into ossification, or kind of like a stabilization in society, because this idea that all of the different masail and all of the different scenarios that could be expounded upon were expounded upon. And yes, so Professor Masood Bedrin, which is an Islamic legal scholar from the UK, he posits that this divine law being considered to be equal with the legal application of the Sharia is a gross misinterpretation of the nature of Sharia as an everlasting fountain, to take wisdom and benefit from over the course of civilization and society. Yes, so like I stated earlier, the scholars estimate that there are between 300 and 350 to 500 legal verses out of the Qur'an's 6,000 plus verses. And this highlights the limited scope, right? The limited scope of the direct legal injunctions and commands of Allah in regards to the Qur'an, right? And we know that in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, his Sunnah is dynamic in the sense that there's relative wisdom to be taken from the different interactions that he had throughout his life, from when it came to family, or when it came to politics or military, and even in social aspects as well, right? The establishment of the masjid in Medina, and the market as well in Medina when they first migrated there. So understanding this limited scope, this bounded scope of the Sharia, helps us to emphasize the necessity of human engagement and dynamism in the nature of fiqh in responding to contemporary issues and things that arise throughout civilization. Okay. So the point that I want to make in regards to the Sharia is that it gives us an ethical and moral understanding and principles that help guide us throughout our lives, on top of those limited scope of direct divine legislation and injunction. Overall, the goal of Sharia gives us a principle that guides our lives in an ethical and moral way, right? And Dr. Khalid Abul Fadl, he says in his book, Reasoning with God, that the Sharia is intended to be the ultimate good that God desires for human beings, right? So there is this parallel nature between modern interpretations of governance and society, and the maqasid and the goals and the higher principles of the Sharia in civilization, throughout Islamic civilization. Okay, so like I had stated before, there's this distinction between the Sharia being the source of Islamic law, as well as fiqh, right? So as we can see here, the Sharia is the immutable divine sources, right, revealed through the Qur'an and Sunnah, and the fiqh is that interpretation of the Sharia, right? And that domain of fiqh is able to be adapted in regards to contemporary context and social needs, and also, as we'll see in just a little bit, the domain of fiqh is split also into further domains. There is the domain of ibadat and muamalat, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Okay. Yes. So in regards to muamalat, so muamalat, like we spoke about, is that interpersonal and social dimension of Islamic law, and distinct from ibadat. So ibadat is what we consider to be your prayer, fasting, hajj, things of that nature. And then the muamalat is considered to be business transactions, or family relations. Right? There's marriage and divorce, as well as personal social interactions with friends and family and things of that nature. So this is a more of an interpersonal aspect of the divine law. And in this space, I believe that this is what characterizes modern life in relation to ibadat, where it's more of a personal affair, more of a vertical affair between an individual and his Lord. So the prayer and the fasting, these domains of Islamic law, are stagnant in nature. So there's not much of a dynamism or of a reinterpretation or a revival, so to speak, that can be taken from this aspect of law. The only space in which this aspect of the law, in my estimation, could be built upon is a deeper understanding in the reasons behind why we do what we do, or why we worship the way that we worship. What is the reason? What's the wisdom behind our worship? For example, Imam Ghazali, which is one of the earlier scholars of Maqasid, that's kind of the main premise behind his book, the Ihya Ulumuddin, which is the revival of the religious sciences. So he breaks down a high level understanding of what, for example, his first book in the 40-volume text is the book of knowledge. What is the importance of knowledge? What is the importance of seeking knowledge? And then there's a book of fasting, the book of prayer, right? All these different books dive deeper into a more inner dimension of understanding why the ibadat is necessary, and what's the wisdom behind the divine commands of these ibadats. Whereas the muamalat, in its nature, is always evolving and changing. It's always evolving and changing, and it encompasses the interactions between communities and individuals. Right, so person to person is a more of an interpersonal aspect. So in my estimation, by really diving deep into the legal dynamism that is available for the muamalat, we're able to navigate contemporary issues. We're able to navigate contemporary issues while still remaining true and grounded in the immutable divine law, and that which Allah has legislated for Muslims. So now we can kind of lean a little bit into modernism and help us get a high-level understanding of the realities of modernism. So although there are benefits that modernism has brought to society, our focus here is mainly on the critiques and what can be built upon those critiques to to provide to provide the necessary developments and changes that society see might see as beneficial. So modernism at its essence is the severance of man from revelation. We talk about the Enlightenment period, where the idea of God being God reigning supreme has been stripped from the minds of human beings, and we have now the kind of the theoretical interpretation of how society should be run, of how society should be governed, as well as the nature of human beings and the way in which interpersonal interactions and as well as economic interactions should be carried out in society. So there's an ultimate severance of man from God in regards to the intellectual and theoretical postulations of scholars, as well as the rejection of divine guidance, which pushes through a man-made legislation and deliberation on the way that society should operate. Also, instead of seeking the heightened understanding of the world around us, as well as the realities of life, now in the modern age, man is typically relying upon a limited operation, the limited senses of the sight, the touch, the taste, right? Where things are limited only to what you can see. But we know that in the more religious Islamic framework, right, there is still that level of belief in things that we cannot see, right? There is still that faith and understanding that not everything that is real can be experienced in a tangible sense. Also, modernism can be characterized by the constant progressive nature that sees no end. So civilization progresses and continues to progress and continues to progress. And there is no necessarily understanding about what these progressions are leading to. It's just progression for the sake of progression. Whether it be technologically, whether it be in the fields of economics and things of that nature, there is this constant progression that sees no, in this context, that doesn't really see much of an end at this point. Also, these technological progressions have, in a way, caused certain destructions in the environment. For example, deforestation and global warming are very characteristic aspects of modern technology. Oops, I went too far. And then the last thing is a heightened sense of individualism. So the way that society has functioned now is that individuals are seen as people are really considered to be your own individual reliance, whereas in previous societies and civilizations, there is this communal aspect. There's this communal emphasis that allows for people to be interconnected, that it gives people the ability to rely on each other in a more higher state. Whereas now, people are really relegated to the individual, and there is more of this fragmentation of society and of families and of even broader, outside of the nuclear family, from in-laws to cousins and things of that nature. There is this smaller scope of community. That's a reality of modernism. And one of the ways in which people seek to, I guess in a way, I guess you could say, kind of remedy this individualism and this loneliness is through hedonistic aspects and forms of enjoyment. So the rise of different ways of entertaining yourself, whether they be in through kind of sitting and engaging in watching TV shows and pornography and things like that. Like, there is this stripping of a eudaimonic goal of pleasure of Allah, where it's been switched to seeking individual pleasures. So how do we engage these realities of modernism? How do we engage these realities of modern life and of modern thought? As I said before, I don't believe that all of the realities of modernity, all of the things that have been birthed through modernity, whether they be technological, medical, scientific, I don't think that all of these realities that have been birthed through modern technology and science are all damned. Rather, I think there still needs to be this ethical framework that's used as a filter that critically engages with modern thought and modern life. So one of the ways in which the scholars would do this during the times of the heightened Islamic civilization is through the Maqasid. The Maqasid al Sharia being the preservation of life, the preservation of the intellect, the preservation of property, wealth, and religion. And other forms such as Maslaha, which is kind of the public good, right? So the general consensus of the community coming and reaching a certain conclusion about an approach or a way in which kind of legislation should be carried out in society, and other forms such as istihsan and others and things like that, which is like kind of seeking the best outcome, or seeking excellence as a form of legislation and application of law in society. So these moral filters give us those founding principles, those ethical principles that allow for us to be able to provide a remedy to the realities of modern civilization and modern life, while not sacrificing necessarily the progressive nature of modern modern thought and technology and things of that nature. When we look at the examples of societies such as Andalus and the Abbasid Caliphate, these civilizations were very progressive and aggressive in their approach to science and technology. I mean, many of the greatest scholars of these disciplines, whether it be mathematics or medicine, they all came from that background of Islamic civilization and scholarship, but they understood that the world is not necessarily meant to stay stagnant. The world is not necessarily meant to stay in a way ignorant of, or stay away from those from the benefits that can be brought upon civilization and society. Rather, it's just having that understanding that, as Allah says in the Qur'an, we've created everything on earth for you, right? Everything on earth has been created for you, right? Meaning that these are tools that Allah has placed within our midst to be able to take advantage of and to improve the way that we live, to improve the way that we engage with each other, and to improve the way that we are able to worship God. Okay, so in regards to, this is kind of just continuing on, in regards to maqasid at its roots, The theory of Maqasid al Sharia is typically attributed to the Andalusian scholar, so the scholar from Islamic Spain, Imam al-Shatibi. Now, he's considered to be the first one to actually formulate a general theory of the Maqasid, but there are scholars that came before him, such as Imam al-Juwayni and Imam al-Ghazali, who was the student of Juwayni in Iran and in the Persian side of, or more the eastern part of the Islamic civilization. There are understandings that they kind of had a proto understanding of the Maqasid and the general principles or the goals of the Sharia, right? But the first to actually formulate a theory of the Maqasid was Imam al-Shatibi in Spain. And I just wanted to read this quote from from a book that discusses his biography, his intellectual biography. So the Imam formulated his theory in a time when Granada, which is a city in Spain, was undergoing unprecedented developments within all facets of society, including political, economic, legal, religious, and social. At this point, Granada reached a state of stability and calmness, and this civilizational stability provided the space for a kind of scholarly activity and reassessment of tradition that was necessary to address the oncoming challenges. So this is coming at a time when Christians are living in Spain and Jews are living in Spain as well, right? And there's different aspects of, there's different points of contention within society. So the scholar, he penned the work Al-Muwafaqat, which contains his Maqasid theory, and this gives this Maqasid theory intended to give his audience of jurists and the broader community a theoretical framework that could broaden consensus, that could give a more inclusive understanding of the religion and of the law, that takes away from those long-standing divisions. And I think that certain divisions that were experienced during the time of Imam al-Shatibi and others are characteristic of some of the divisions that we find in our time, whether it be in the domain of Aqidah and Fiqh, and things that are not necessarily considered to be Islamic, such as technology and culture and things of that nature. Islam in its nature is not necessarily damning of these aspects of civilization and society. Rather, it's engaging, right? It's meant to be an engaging filter that allows us to be able to understand modernity at a high level, and understand the realities of modernity at a high level, while still staying true to those legal principles and roots. So in regards to addressing contemporary issues with divine law principles, like I said, I had brought up community engagement as well as family dynamics. Another aspect could be in economics. When we talk about the issue of Islamic finance and things of that nature, right? We know that in its essence, there is a principle that allows for permissibility unless proven otherwise, and we know that in regards to being proven otherwise, there are those principles of riba, or monopolization and things of that nature are condemned from an Islamic perspective. But again, you can see that expansiveness of the Maqasid and those principles allowing for anything, any type of application that is still rooted in ethics, and that's still rooted in ethics and morality, but still has that guise of the Sharia and the divine guidance in the actions that people take. So it gives that agency to human beings to be able to understand or to apply what they seem fit, what they might deem fit, in their own personal sphere, while still holding true to the divine law. So this is kind of my pushback when it comes to the critique that some people might say that Islam came as a top-down legislation that answers every single question about every single issue for all times. You know, in my estimation, I disagree with that, and I think that Allah has given us, like as He says in the Qur'an, an open road to be able to understand His legislation and the goals of the divine law, and giving human beings the agency to be able to move freely within society and different aspects of society and civilization. Yeah. So to conclude at a high level, as I said before, that my estimation is that the Sharia as a source of law is immutable in its sources rather than its application or understanding. And I believe, and I had spoken about how the domain of fiqh has been grossly misinterpreted as Sharia. In my estimation, it's not. In my estimation, fiqh as an enterprise, as a legal enterprise, is simply the progressive application of human understanding that progresses through time and context. And then I furthermore broke down the domain of fiqh into Ibadat and Mu'amalat, stating that Ibadat is a constant, unchanging, and necessary in order for us to be able to hold on to our spiritual foundations and our spiritual roots when it comes to the prayer, to the fasting, to the Hajj and the Umrahs and things like that. And then the space of Mu'amalat allows for flexibility and engagement with realities of modernity, whether they be economic, social, political, communal, and things of that nature. And then after diving into the realities of Mu'amalat, we broke down the understanding of modernity at a high level, from its severance of man from divine legislation and divine revelation, and the understanding that man-made laws, or understanding that man is the legislator of his own affairs, which in fact he's not. But rather, the approach that can be taken, and that can be critically engaging, is understanding that there are principles and goals that Allah has provided for mankind, but it doesn't have to come at a sacrifice of that dynamism of that legal, social, technological dynamism of modern technology, modern thought. Rather, it allows for a critical engagement with modernity that still holds true to divine principles and divine legislation. So this is kind of the main crux of my presentation. This was just a presentation form of a paper that I had written for my degree, and I hope that it was beneficial for you all. If any mistakes that I made is from myself, and any benefit you might have taken it from Allah. We can open the floor for any questions or comments about the subject.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Joshua. So inshallah, any questions or comments, we can start.